In this video, we'll be discussing whether or not Cimarron deserves the Oscar for Outstanding Picture of the year that it came out, although it's another half-year and half-year scenario in this case. The eligibility period lasted from July of 1930 to June of 1931, so anything from that time frame goes. We have quite a few movies to talk about this time around, but first things first, we need to address the milestones. First is Skippy, a film revolving around a young boy named Skippy, played by Jackie Cooper. Unfortunately, this is another one of those movies that's almost impossible for me to find, so I was unable to actually watch it. Still, it's worth mentioning since Jackie Cooper is on record as being the youngest nominee for the Academy Award for Best Actor. He got the nomination at the ripe old age of 9 years old. It's been over 80 years since the award ceremony, and in that time, he still retains the title. Another movie I can't watch is Horn. Again, not on Netflix, YouTube, Hulu, or anywhere else online except for outrageous prices on Amazon. Still, Horn is significant as it was the very first non-documentary film to be shot on location in Africa. Supposedly, it's unbelievably racist, but happily karma bit these people in the ass this time. Turns out that relocating a production to a continent recently ravaged by war and colonialism is an incredibly bad idea. Long story short, at least one crew member was eaten by crocodiles and the lead actress got malaria and sued the studio. And last but not least is Eastland. I've mentioned in a previous video that The Patriot was the only Best Picture, or Outstanding Picture as it was still called this time, nominee that has become a lost film, but Eastland actually comes close. This movie is sort of half lost, if that makes sense. By that I mean only one print of the film is known to exist, though somehow a bootleg DVD has also come about. Said bootleg, however, is also extremely rare and hard to come by. Very few people have seen either of these. So, yeah, would love to watch these three movies to talk about them more in depth, but I can't. Love to, but can't. I don't normally hear them being talked about the best films of the year in retrospect, but still, they're all a part of film history. If you see them for yourself, by all means, make up your own mind for what you think. Moving on to the first real movie to talk about, that being A Free Soul, the movie that won the Oscar for Best Actor and launched the career of Clark Gable. Jan Ash, played by Norma Shearer, is a young woman who lives with her lawyer father Stephen, played by Lionel Barrymore, who defends a known gangster named Ace, played by Clark Gable. Needless to say, her stiff-lipped, erudite family doesn't seem to approve, and the rest of the movie is about, God, like a million things. It's really hard to try to summarize this film and all of its subplots without getting into spoiler territory, so let's just talk about the pros and cons real quick. As I mentioned, this is the movie that won Lionel Barrymore the Oscar, and to his credit, he does deserve it. He plays a very tragic and realistic portrayal of an alcoholic, one that still holds up today. Yeah, a lot of these older movies sort of portray boozing as just more of a funny piece of comic relief, but the character of Stephen Ash actually portrays the more dangerous sides of alcoholism. He doesn't drink because it's fun, he needs it to function. The rest of the cast are also pretty good, each doing a great job at playing off of each other and having these real human relationships. Unfortunately, A Free Soul has the same issue that Cimarron has, in that it feels like a few scenes are missing from it. Particularly when it comes to the ending of the film, as it feels like there needs to be a scene in between the climax and the scene right before it. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. That aside though, A Free Soul is a solid human drama. Though it's nothing too special nowadays. It's a great movie if you're into 30s films, but if you're not, nothing about it really stands out anymore. Aside from, like I said, Stephen Ash, who is a very great character. Moving on to our real landmarks, let's take a look at Animal Crackers. Now you may not have heard of this movie, but you most likely have heard of the celebrities in it. This is one of the most influential films of the Marx Brothers, a family act that made their name on vaudeville and Broadway and eventually transitioned to film at the dawn of the sound era. After a few earlier movies proved to be modest hits, Animal Crackers is what made them the most famous comedians in America, and some of the most influential comedians of all time. Even today, many comics will cite these guys as a specific influence, including Judd Apatow, Adam Sandler, and Seth Rogen. On the movie itself, Animal Crackers' story barely qualifies as one. Mrs. Rittenhouse, played by Margaret Dumont, is hosting a lavish party in honor of the esteemed Captain Jeffrey T. Spaulding, played by Groucho Marx. At the party are a variety of colorful characters who each have their own ideas on how to either ruin the party or curry favor with Captain Spaulding, and yeah, that's really about the gist of it. There's eventually a plot about a painting being stolen and the characters trying to get it back, but it's really nothing more than a setup for more jokes. That's really the best way to describe Animal Crackers in a nutshell. Everything that happens is just meant to be a catalyst for more jokes to pop up. There's still some feel-good moments and a likable romance, but again, they don't take it too seriously, which makes the movie a lot more fun. It's especially an interesting watch since this is sort of what defined comedic films in the 30s and most of the early sound era. While the likes of Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, and other silent comedy stars were known more for slapstick, the Marx Brothers built upon that, adding some deadpan voices to make these zany characters even zanier. Now bear in mind that we're still in the 1930s, so the bulk of jokes here are mainly puns. You're not going to find too much dark humor or sexual innuendos, or at least none that aren't extremely subtle. Instead, they're mostly puns or the characters just straight up insulting each other. Don't take this the wrong way though, as the puns are clever ones. Not all of them hit, but when they miss, they quickly move on to the next bit and you forget all about it. Probably the most famous example would be this.
One morning I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How he got in my pajamas, I don't know.
The whole movie is full of jokes like that. There are really only two problems with Animal Crackers, and unfortunately, they're kind of big ones. The first is that even though most of the characters are fun, the woman who plays Mrs. Rittenhouse is awful. It literally feels like this woman just walked on the set, was given no direction, and just told to smile along with her co-stars. Like, it's distracting how little she cares about what's going on around her, especially given how into it everyone else is. The other issue with Animal Crackers is that it was originally a play before it became a movie, and it definitely feels like it. The whole film takes place in one location, and many scenes just sort of have the characters sitting at a table or standing somewhere, making quip while the camera just sits still. No close-ups, no tracking shots, nothing to make it even remotely stylish. You literally could put this whole movie on a stage and lose nothing in translation. Those two problems aside though, Animal Crackers is fun. Like I said, this is the movie that made the Marx Brothers a household name. It features them at some of their wittiest. If you ever want to see what made these guys so great, or want to see a perfect example of 1930s comedy, or hell, you just want a way to kill 90 minutes, this is a fun watch. Speaking of comedy, let's look at the other big name from this time period, Charlie Chaplin, namely his film City Lights. Widely considered Chaplin's best movie, City Lights was a swan song of the silent era. Yeah, say that 5 times real fast. In fact, it was actually the only silent movie released that year. It only got made because Chaplin was rich enough and had enough clout to act as his own producer and distributor. City Lights once again tells another tale of our favorite little tramp, played by Charlie Chaplin. In this film, he saves the life of an eccentric millionaire, played by Harry Myers, who invites the tramp to come party with him. During his stay at the millionaire's mansion, yeah, there's another tongue twister, blah, 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 the tramp meets a blind flower girl played by Virginia Sherrill, and instantly becomes smitten with her. Thus, the tramp does what any of us would do in his position, and uses new friend's wealth to try to trick the girl into thinking that he's richer than he actually is. City Lights is Chaplin at probably his absolute funniest. From the moment the movie begins, you instantly remember why you love the tramp and seeing him get into hijinks. And while the film is silent, to Chaplin's credit, he was smart enough to use the new sound technology to the movie's advantage. Although in this case, said sound technology was used in the same way that you could say that Peanuts would have lines for the adults. Hey, I laughed. What makes City Lights a ton of fun, especially coming off of Animal Crackers, is that this plot is simple enough that you can do anything you want with the story, as long as it all comes back to the tramp helping out the flower girl. Want to have him go to a drunken party? Go for it. Go on a crazy car ride? Sure thing. Get involved in a boxing match? Hey, why not? The sky's the limit here. As long as it ties back into the story somehow and gets a laugh, the movie does it. Despite these comedic moments, however, City Lights has a good heart to it as well. The tramp's romance with the flower girl is surprisingly not creepy, as it's clear that he just wants to help out this poor woman that life won't give a break to. It's a very real plight, and you do feel bad for her, and you feel bad for the tramp because all he wants to do is help her out. Whenever something goes wrong for him, you'll find yourself laughing, but then you'll find yourself feeling bad because you want to see him win. City Lights is the ultimate tribute to the silent era and was the perfect send-off. Well, almost send-off, but we'll get to that movie in another episode. This was one of the last times that movie audiences would see a comedy like this on the big screen, and it has just the right balance of comedy and heart. It's usually considered Chaplin's best film and one of the best movies of all time, and yeah, I can agree with both of those. But how do you wash down the opus of one film legend with another? Next on the docket is Howard Hughes' war epic, Hell's Angel, a movie about World War I flying aces with a production that was so complicated and hellish that they actually made their own movie about it. We give a quick recap on this movie's production cycle. Production started in 1927 as a silent film. Production was stalled when the first director quit. The Jazz Singer then came out in 1928, which caused Howard Hughes to scrap everything so hard to reshoot the film with sound. The lead actress was then fired and replaced. The film went through 4 directors and ultimately culminated in a flying scene that features stunts so dangerous that several World War I vintage fighter planes were destroyed and killed at least 4 stuntmen. The last stunt was so asinine that the stuntman refused to do it, so Howard Hughes himself hopped into the biplane to do the stunt and proved them right when he was hospitalized for severe skull fractures. The film then opened up against another aviation film that Hughes sued so that Hell's Angels would release on a post. So, after all that trouble, and a whopping 5 years of production, did all that hard work pay off? No, actually the movie is fucking terrible. I get that it's considered a big deal for aviation fanatics and has some very impressive stunts for its time, but if you ignore both of those things and just look at the movie itself, this is bad. Like, really, really bad. Hell's Angels is about a pair of British brothers who joined the Royal Air Force. Roy, played by James Hall, and Monty, played by Ben Lyon. The movie tries to tell you that these are a pair of boys who go off to war and learn that sometimes life isn't always fair. In actuality, it's a crappy soap opera with World War I as a backdrop where Monty bangs his brother's fiancée behind his back. Our heroes, everyone! This is pretty much the alpha and the omega of why Hell's Angels is a pain in the ass to sit through and what really confused me about it. This movie, I guess, is supposed to be celebrating the Air Force pilots who fought in World War I, but if that was the goal, then Howard Hughes has a very strange way of celebrating these people. As mentioned before, he killed several actual World War I veterans while filming the movie, and when we get to the war in the movie itself, most of the pilots are portrayed as a bunch of rude, drunken assholes. Roy is an idealistic idiot, and Monty, well, I'm just gonna give you the Cliff Notes version of pretty much all of his dialogue in the movie.
You fools, why do you let him kill you like this? What are you fighting for? Patriotism, duty.
Bitch, 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 mo, 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 why, why.
This is one of the most weirdly plotted films I've ever seen in my life. Literally the entire first 15 minutes you could cut out and probably lose nothing. Brothers have a friend at the beginning named Carl, played by John Darrow, who's drafted by Germany to go fight in the war. Oh, so maybe the movie's going to be about the horrors of war and how these three close friends find themselves on opposing sides and eventually reunite and have to make a tough call, and he's killed off halfway through the movie with no fanfare or ever meeting the brothers again. Even when it does get to the aviation scenes, they're really nothing special anymore. Granted, these stunts were impressive for their time, but because the characters are so freaking unlikable, you honestly don't give a shit about whether they live or die. And these scenes drag on forever. The Zeppelin battle halfway through the movie bores me to tears and the finale isn't much better. And again, I have to ask, where the hell is the music? Howard Hughes spared no expense in trying to make this movie as much of a spectacle as possible. You see a Zeppelin explode, airplanes crash into each other in midair, and even a scene that's in color. Literally everything you could possibly do in a movie from this time period, he did. And you're telling me that he couldn't spare some money for a freaking orchestra? I want to hear some imposing music as the Germans plane come in. And even if they couldn't put it on the background, they could have dubbed over it. It's not like the dialogue these guys are shouting at each other is worth listening to anyway. If there's one thing in Hell's Angels that I do enjoy, it's probably the villain, Baron von Kranz, played by Lucien Prevost. He's barely in the movie, only really showing up at the end, but when he does, he chews the hell out of the scenery. I mean, look at him. There's absolutely nothing subtle about him, and it's hilarious. Aside from that, though, there's not much to make Hell's Angels worth a revisit so many years later. Granted, it did inspire people to get into aviation, the stunts were impressive for their time, and it was one of the first big independent films. Once you take those things, however, well, I would call it bad, but I think the word wretched is a bit more accurate. Like, I honestly feel like I've wasted my time watching this film. That's how much I hate it. Let's move on to the other Howard Hughes production of that year, The Front Page. While this wasn't directed by Hughes, this was still produced by him and actually was featured on the awards circuit. Instead, it was directed by Louis Milestone. Ooh, the guy who did All Quiet on the Western Front. We're in for a treat with this one. Hildy Johnson, played by Pat O'Brien, has decided to leave his job working as a journalist in a press room to move to New York. Unfortunately, however, he chose to do so on the eve of the biggest news day of the year, as a murderer, played by Georgie Stone, has escaped the police station and is running amok. Hildy is then pulled back into this world that he's trying to leave and is caught in a crossfire as the case constantly unfolds. This is a much better movie, both because it's actually entertaining and the characters are likable, but also because it's very sharp and smart satire. However bad you think the news industry is today, when this movie came out, it used to be so much worse. This was the era of William Randolph Hearst and other people like that. This was back when the newspaper industry could start a fucking war if it got more copies of the paper sold. And the film does show that. These journalists are always coming up with new ways of saying things and reporting a story that are often either exaggerated or just flat out lies. Adolphe Menjou plays Walter Burns, who's the head of the newspaper that Hildy reports to, and he's a great villain. Every time he's on screen, he's always manipulating people, always telling them what they want to hear, but not what they need to hear, and withholding key pieces of information that sell a good lie. Kinda like a newspaper. Huh. Yeah, there is some really smart commentary going on in this film, and it was probably a very culturally important film at the time due to how dangerous the news barons were. Hell, you could argue they still are. Even taking the satire out of it, though, this is a really fun movie. It's marketed as a screwball comedy, though I don't really find it funny. I see it more as a thriller, especially since things escalate in such a way that they only get worse as it goes on. While The Front Page is an excellent film, I do need to give out the warning that the first half is very much a slow burn. When it first begins, not much is happening and things advance at a very slow rate. It's all built up to the biggest news day of the year in the second half, which is when things start going crazy. But yeah, that first part can be a bit dull. Let me assure you though that if you stick with it, it's a damn good movie. We're still not done yet when it comes to the snubs, however, as we need to talk about a movie that you almost definitely have heard of before. That's right, it's Dracula! One of the most iconic horror movies of all time, featuring one of the most iconic horror movie villains of all time. Telling the story of the infamous vampire count Dracula, played by Bela Lugosi, who wreaks havoc on the rich upper class of London before meeting his match in the esteemed Professor Van Helsing, played by Edward Van Sloan. The impact of this film is hard to overstate, as its success jump-started the golden age of horror and the universal horror films that would become one of the staples of Hollywood. I would call Dracula the first horror icon in the movie history, but I think we have the Phantom of the Opera in 1925 for that. And if you really want to go back, Nosferatu in 1922. Although Nosferatu was actually just a rip-off the Dracula novel, and is the same basic story as this movie, although Nosferatu himself has a unique enough design to stand out as an iconic character in his own right. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. Dracula definitely launched the horror craze, kicking off the first wave of horror icons that would last all the way up to the creature features of the 1950s. From when this came out up until, I want to say 1958, it would seem like a new horror monster would enter pop culture infamy every couple of years. Most of the rules of these classic horror movies were written here, and the vast majority of them come from the Count himself. Just look at him, he's instantly iconic. The black cape, the slicked hair, the fangs, the Transylvanian accent, the evil stare. Even if you've never seen this movie, you know this character because he's so ingrained into pop culture. Despite having grown up with a large number of his parodies, I was surprised to find that I could still take him seriously as a villain. He's very sneaky, underhanded, and menacing, but when the time calls for it, he can be very charming and diabolical. And Van Helsing is also great. He's this eccentric old man who's seen some pretty weird shit in his time, so you can see how he would be the first to figure out that maybe a vampire is what's been causing so many issues. But they don't go too far with it, which is a trap that I think a lot of later Van Helsings fall into. He has one foot very firmly placed in reality at all times, and his confrontation with Dracula near the end of the film is about as classic as you can get. Unfortunately, despite how influential these two characters are, most of the rest of the movie surrounding them hasn't quite aged with grace. It's nowhere near as bad as Cimarron or Hell's Angels, but it does occasionally suffer from horror movie syndrome where characters that we're supposed to like have to behave like idiots to get the story going. Like, take this opening scene for example. A broker named Renfield, played by Dwight Fry, is sent to Castle Dracula in Transylvania to help the Count speculate in London real estate. Now, to be fair, the build-up is good, but put yourself in Mr. Renfield's shoes. All the locals warn him not to go there at night, the path takes him on a dark road, he sees his carriage driver turn into a bat before his very eyes, and when he arrives at Castle Dracula, he meets this gentleman who says this.
Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make.
Renfield's reaction?
Oh, it's really good to see you.
Oh my god, how stupid is this moron? Rather than letting Darwinism take its course and killing his ass, Dracula instead chooses to hypnotize Renfield into becoming his loyal servant, and from there, it gets silly.
We'll keep your promise when we get to London, won't you, Master?
Not when I can get nice fat spiders. He came and stood below my window in the moonlight. And he promised me things. Nothing words.
This is some of the most embarrassingly bad acting I have ever seen in my life. Like, not even in a so bad that it's good way. I genuinely feel sorry for this guy that this will forever be immortalized on the silver screen. It wouldn't be so bad except, honestly, I think he's in the movie more than Dracula is. There's also not much in the way of a climax to the film either. No scary chase, no intense fistfight, no suspense. The heroes just find out where Dracula's hiding place is, and they go over there and kill him. Kind of a letdown given how much build-up there is throughout the film. Still, Dracula does remain one of the most influential movies of all time, especially in the horror genre, and despite what I've been bringing up, it's not that bad of a watch. It's honestly one of those movies that gets better each time you rewatch it. Like, the first time I saw it, I really didn't dig it, but watching it for this video, I actually enjoyed it. But we've still yet to get to our real stuff of the day. There's actually two movies that I have to analyze for a feature presentation, since they came out at around the same time, have similar themes, and both were, and still are, very culturally important. To round off this review, we're going to take a look at Little Caesar and The Public Enemy. These were two of the, if not the, very first true gangster movies in cinematic history. Obviously there were crime movies before this, but they would usually be about some idiot who joins a crime gang, kinda like an outsider looking in, or about the cops trying to bust the criminals. These were the first films to revolve around the gangster themselves. The Public Enemy tells the rise and fall of Tom Powers, played by James Cagney, a thug who falls in with several bootleggers and uses his power high to abuse everyone he meets in his personal life. Little Caesar tells the rise and fall of Little Caesar Enrico Bandello, played by Edward G. Robinson, who slowly but steadily rises higher and higher in the Chicago underworld. Without these two, we probably would never have had other great characters such as Michael Corleone, Henry Hill, or even Walter White. Rico especially sticks out as the truly iconic movie character, almost on the same level as Dracula! It's a great performance that he manages to ooze both slime and charm. You want to follow him, but you also know that he's an awful human being. And I know what you're asking, if he's so iconic, how come I've never heard of this character before? Unless you have heard of this character before, in which case, just disregard what I just said. Well, here's the thing. You may not recognize the name or the face, but you're definitely going to recognize his voice.
Well, you know too much. I ain't gonna take any chances. You're hanging around with me, see?
One for you.
And me, boss.
One for you.
And me, boss?
One for you.
And me, boss.
One for you.
Shut up, fat woman. You won't be needing your husband anymore, see? So listen up.
Stop talking like that. Stop talking like White Cobber. So I talk, see?
Yeah, while there is a certain level of cheesiness to Little Caesar, it actually still holds up as a very solid gangster flick, even so many decades later. And it ends on a note that really makes you sit and think for a little bit. The Public Enemy is good too, but I do think it's the lesser of these two movies. Tom Powers isn't nearly as magnetic as Rico, and there isn't as much upward mobility in the film. Like, in Little Caesar, Rico is always moving, always shaking things up, always on the rise. In The Public Enemy, Powers becomes a mob enforcer and then stays there for most of the rest of the film. Also, it's a bit more preachy, if I'm going to be honest. Despite this, however, The Public Enemy is dark. You see a lot more of the bystanders caught up in Powers' violent lifestyle, particularly his family and loved ones. I especially love this scene. Isn't he such a bastard? Granted, it's nothing too far. I mean, it was still the 30s after all. But it's pretty edgy for its time. Hell, there's even a rape scene. That is ballsy. I don't think I need to tell you that both of these movies were given a lot of controversy when they came out for pretty obvious reasons. And they most likely helped accelerate the Hays Code into becoming more commonplace. It's interesting too, as Little Caesar is comparatively not all that violent. Instead, its controversy came about as some people complain about portraying a gay man as the main character, which, yeah, let's talk about that too. It's never really caught on as a common complaint, but there were some criticisms of Rico being gay. In case you're wondering why it's a bad thing, why a character could be gay, again, 1930s. Now, they don't explicitly say it in the film, God knows they would never get away with that, but there are a lot of little clues that you can look out for and help the character more interesting. For example, look at this scene where Rico is staring at this very powerful gangster played by Ralph Ince. Now, is he looking at him because this is the kind of guy that Rico idolizes, or is he attracted to him and checking him out? Is it both? Why does he never take a girlfriend throughout the movie, even if women to these gangsters are used as status symbols? It adds a lot of depth to the film and gives rewatch value. Both of these movies came out in the midst of the gang wars that defined Prohibition. Real-life gangsters like Al Capone and Arnold Rothstein were coldly murdering their enemies, and sometimes innocent bystanders would get caught in the fray. These were movies that showed the destiny of these gangsters, what they do, how they affect the people around them, and how toxic they can be. Nowadays, they're nothing special, but back then, this was a new kind of movie and a kind that was very relevant to America at the time. But, of course, neither film was nominated at the 4th Academy Awards, which ended with Cimarron winning. So why is that? Well, this brings up yet another recurring problem with the Academy that you'll see popping up quite often. That being that they rarely go for the truly shocking, edgy films, even though it's usually the shocking, edgy films that end up being the most influential, groundbreaking movies. Instead, they'll choose the more, quote-unquote, safe option. This isn't a universal truth, but still one that's more common than it should be. I mean, really look at what these films accomplish respectively. Cimarron talked about being nice to Indians and prostitutes without having to actually take any risks by analyzing how bad their lives can be. Little Caesar and The Public Enemy talked about how gangsters were destroying American life by showing them destroy American life. These two characters rip apart families, ruin lives, kill people, and end up being very self-destructive. An entire genre and character archetype sprung from these two individuals, and neither film was even nominated. And while Lionel Barrymore's performance in A Free Soul was very excellent, both James Cagney and Edward G. Robinson should have gotten Best Actor nominees. Even taking these two movies out of the equation though, the front page was also talking about a big problem in America at the time, and City Lights was giving a fond send-off to a style of filmmaking that would soon be gone forever. Hell, even if it's not the best movie, Dracula remains one of the most influential films of all time, and I'm sure they were well aware of this fact when it first came out. I'm kinda hesitating just calling this a flat-out snub, since Cimarron was very well liked when it first came out, but after looking up the critical reviews and thinking about the influence they had, then yeah, I really don't feel so hesitant anymore. Giving Cimarron the Oscar for Outstanding Picture was a definite snub. I'll admit that I'm a bit biased on this because I really fucking hate Cimarron, but that still doesn't take away from just how influential these two movies are. Like I said, The Public Enemy hasn't aged the best, but Little Caesar is still a ton of fun. Check it out if you get the chance. I mean, come on, how can you not love listening to this voice for a solid 80 straight minutes, see? Meow, see, meow.
Dracula! I am Bacula to lay the smacula. Like great grandpa Trevor, whipping hearts, inhaling zombie farts. I'll find your body parts so I can put you back together. I'll race all over the place, and when I find your face, I'm gonna spick his back and slip and snap. I got your nose and I found your toes and your elbows and your tiny penis. Oh my God, it's so tiny. How do you Yeah, Dracula, I will attack you, bruh, you'll be spectacular. When I set you on fire, Drac appears every 100 years, but he'll cry bloody tears and wish he never was a vampire.
To alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems.